Do you want me to introduce you?
Yeah, why not?
Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode. My name's Shay, and here today I've got Dennis O'Connor. He's going to share a little bit around what's happening in the world right now and how we can be best prepared moving forward and what we can expect when things change. And the constant in the world is change. And Dennis is going to just share a little bit around the change that we can expect and how we can evolve and change with it. A little bit of background. Dennis is a 20 years nurse consultant, has worked in the field of health, mental well-being, and is extremely knowledgeable, wise, and informative on many different topics. So today, Dennis, welcome.
Thanks, Shay. I think you've been very generous about my level of knowledge there. I'm kind of more a jack of all trades, but I do like to do a bit of research into some things that I hear and see. And if one of the things that I kind of consider is if I'm finding all these things that we're talking about absolutely confusing and baffling, I don't know how the average person can navigate kind of what they're seeing through the media. So as you know, a lot of what we try to do is try to cut through some of that confusion and to try and give people an idea about how to make sense of everything that's happening. And we've got so many, contradictory reports that are coming through. I mean, we were just talking about it before. About a year ago or a year and a half ago, we have this idea of these bats flying around the place that you can eat, and then you get incredibly sick, and you can spread a virus overnight all around the world, which doesn't fit with any virology papers that I've ever read, certainly. And then all of a sudden now we've got a narrative that we have these things called gain of function tests having been done in laboratories in China. And now we're saying that, no, it wasn't a bat or it wasn't a pangolin, but it was something that's been released from a lab that's caused this kind of devastation. So, it's how people can navigate this. And then the other thing which is relevant is we just keep on hearing this word cases. And we've talked previously about the validity of the PCR test, which is the polymerase chain reaction test that's done. And I don't want to kind of get very deep into that right now, but essentially if you run this test at over what are called amplification cycles, the tests become very, very inaccurate above a level. Some people say about 28, some people say 32. They become grossly inaccurate. And we're actually having many of our tests that have led to our perception of this pandemic being run at cycles of over 40, which, so if we're using this kind of data as evidence to base our decisions on globally, there is no way that we can have accurate decisions being made. So unfortunately, just there's gap after gap after gap in relation to what we're being told and how we're being told it, and then the response to these measures as well. And it's happening throughout the world in every country, and it seems to be quite coordinated.
Yeah, I'm super interested. What's happening in the world moving forward? Like, how do we combat this? We're seeing lots of cases in the world of people getting the vaccine and not doing so well. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit on like what's happening when people get in the double dosage, maybe talk about the Clapton interview, and I'm just curious to hear your perspective on how that's impacting people.
Yeah, so I think we talked about it earlier, so we're probably going to have to split this up because I kind of don't want my YouTube channel getting cancelled, and it's just another sorry situation that to actually try and have a genuine discussion without fear-mongering and to reference genuine medical research, I risk my channel getting cut. So for the first part of the conversation, I'm going to have to be deliberately vague, which is not good. Even mentioning the V word, the algorithms can pick you up and can kind of hide your content. But as you mentioned just before, the Eric Clapton, for those who don't know, very famous musician, wrote loads of hit songs, considered at times one of the best guitarists in the world. And he had his first, let's say, injection, and then he had a second injection later, and he got a very bad neuropathy from this. And he recently did a kind of a very brutally honest interview on what he originally thought before getting these shots and how he felt afterwards and what he thinks afterwards, and really to kind of, I guess, synopsize that, to say that he's felt betrayed and lied to, and he was misinformed about just about everything in relation to his decision making before getting this injection. It probably would hit that fairly close to the mark. We've got so many contradictions, it's just not funny. I mean, there's a report in the paper fairly recently about 200 young men having a thing called myocarditis after having this injection. And as somebody who's worked in intensive care for 10 or so years, I find it inconceivable that there's warnings against maybe younger people getting these injections, and they might have myocarditis or they might have blood clots, but we're running at full pelt to give older people who are actually at higher risk generally these kind of things, when young, fit, healthy people are actually in a risk cohort. There's no logic here. There's no sense to me, unless you kind of look at a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is unfortunately very, very sinister.
Maybe we can go over that in the censored version, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on something that happened with a few nuns, potentially. Maybe you could elaborate on the vaccine and how they, managed to navigate through that process.
Yeah, I don't have my links with me, unfortunately, today. I'm at Shay's house, but it's kind of, it intrigues me that it's actually quite difficult. You come across this information, and then when you try and find it again, the algorithms for your searches just make it really difficult to find. But I know I've got it saved somewhere at home. But in a convent in America with about 200 nuns, which was fully isolated, adhering to all the protocols, we had this cohort of nuns receiving both injections, the first and second lot. And out of I can't remember how many nuns got sick, but out of that number, a fair few got sick, and many of them died. So this is a cohort that shouldn't have had a mechanism to be able to get exposure to a virus. They have done everything as per the policies and procedures. Many of them got sick, and some of them are dead. So that's what happens for older people who actually follow the protocols. And this to me sounds, again, very suspicious and a little bit sinister.
So what happens if someone does get injured by a vaccine? What's the next step? Is it curable or not? Should we save that for the censored version? What's your thoughts?
Listen, I'll just touch on that lightly, but I think we gotta just watch the V word, and even saying that could actually get my channel picked up. So, but that's fine. But one of the biggest problems with these injections, of which many people know about, is there is no liability towards the makers of these injections. And what that means is that if you do get hurt, you cannot sue the companies involved. So that's almost like the analogy would be, how would you feel if you walked into a restaurant and on the door it said, we have got maybe a risk of getting a serious food poisoning here that could kill you. If that happens, we take no responsibility whatsoever. I think you'd think twice about eating in a restaurant. And if it went down to car manufacturers, if they said, okay, we've got a record of a dodgy steering wheel here, or a tire problems there, or an exploding engine, but if you get killed, or if your family get killed in our car, you cannot sue us. I think we'd all think twice. Yet when it comes to this, there's a small group of people asking questions, but not enough. We need more people to be asking questions about this stuff. I'm very concerned about the longer term effects of these injections that people are having. And again, this stuff is not too difficult to research, but we've had research on coronaviruses for since roughly the mid-60s. So we got a lot of history about how these things work. We also have a decent bit of research on what are called these mRNA treatments, which are messenger RNA treatments. And we've got 3 animal studies that should scare the hell out of anybody. And one of the animal studies relates to ferrets, the other relates to cats, and I think that another one is in relation to rodents. I'm not so familiar with that third study. But on both of those studies, which were conducted, I think, around even 10, 15 years ago, the animals were given an mRNA treatment, and then they were exposed to a wild form of a coronavirus, and all the animals in those 3 groups died from something called pathogenic priming, and they had what's called a cytokine storm. So what that means is that their immune systems were fully primed to identify an infection, and they dramatically overcompensated the body's response. And it is this technology which is being kind of thrown out. And I'm not sure again if people know, but this treatment has not been approved. It's been approved for emergency use authorization, so it hasn't gone through the rigorous approval structure that would normally be undertaken for medications. And that structure normally has a process of anything from 6 years to 10 years to 15 years. So we've got this thing that's been developed supposedly over the course of, a year, to be really generous, 18 months. And it's been advertised. And the other comment I would make about that is, if we have such a serious threat of the world's population going to be ending with this pandemic, why are we getting this thing advertised so much? We should be running to the shops, the doctor surgeries or wherever, to get this thing. There's a massive campaign push with this thing, and this really bothers me. The fact that it has to be sold and continually pushed. If it's a no-brainer, if this thing was safe, it was effective. If were people dropping dead on the streets, then it's obvious human psychology, we're going to go and get it. That's not happening. There's people with concerns, there's people with fears, and they're not getting listened to.
And we're going to dive into the deep dive on the censored version. Where can people go and watch that? What's going to be happening with that one? What are we going to be talking about?
I think we're actually going to talk about, and I'm it's always, I guess, you've got to be considerate about clickbait and whatnot. But I don't think it's hyperbolic to be talking about Armageddon at this stage, especially if we have the numbers being thrown out at us that 60% of this population has been injected and 70% here. And if the animal studies that we're talking about are reflective of what could happen with this injection, we could have serious numbers of deaths on our hands. And unfortunately, it's not just me in my capacity as a nurse saying this. There's some very prominent and experienced and qualified immunologists and virologists and researchers who are actually saying the same thing. So when I hear these guys saying something like that, it does really bother me, and it really concerns me.
Cool. Any closing statements?
Yeah, listen, I think we'll also probably end up touching on is there a motive behind what we see going on? What could that motive be? Who might be behind some of these things that are going on a global basis? And why not? I'm going to put my conspiracy hat on. I think that if you're not thinking along conspiratorial lines in these kind of settings at the moment, you're putting your life at risk, and it's a foolish decision to make, to be trusting some of these suggestions that we're being given that just don't make any clinical sense.